Okay, so we're back, and let's open the floor to questions and discussion about this illness. So, yes, ma'am.
My client, I was telling her I was coming to a gambling conference. She said, well, it can't be that big a deal because they keep building these casinos and it's okay, so they must not be a problem. And the gentleman behind her said, well, have you ever noticed a commercial that whenever they're telling you about a gambling problem, the music gets really loud? I mean, so he was trying to convince her that it is an addiction too. So they were back and forth about it's not a problem because Maryland is doing it. So I know there's a lot of propaganda attached to it. And so when you talk about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, politicians would never make a bad decision. The need for revenue. Okay, and of course in our current political environment, raising taxes is a very, very difficult thing to do. So it seems like free money. And I think what the states are going to learn is that there's only so much blood in the stone. So that, for instance, in Delaware, we know that a lot of the people who have come to the casinos are residents of extreme eastern Maryland, Cecil County, and going down the eastern shore, and Ocean City, Maryland, in those areas. And also southeastern Pennsylvania. So now that there are local venues like the Hollywood Casino in Cecil County, we've seen a big drop. Okay, so it's very appealing to state legislatures to pass these laws, and there's a recognition in that process that this will cause addiction. Okay, there is a recognition, so that when these laws are passed, and the same is true for Maryland, there is money apportioned to prevention and treatment, as there should be. The casinos, of course, are not in the business of keeping you away from the casino. They're in the business of getting you into it. So the advertisements don't show, people committing suicide or, riding home in a very bad emotional place, of course. They're selling the idea. But so do liquor companies and tobacco companies. Beer commercials don't show people sleeping under railroad bridges on cardboard boxes for obvious reasons. Liquor commercials basically appeal to men and let them know that the best women will want to become close friends with you if you drink with them. There's an ad I saw for the first time last night, something called 1800 something, some liquor, and Ray Liotta is at a boxing match and he's got his glass of whatever it is, it's clear. He's obviously the coolest guy, and he looks across the ring, and there is an absolutely drop-dead gorgeous woman, and he looks at her, and he gives her the old Frank Sinatra Rat Pack style, hey, baby, with his glass. And, of course, he sachets over. She has about 42 moving parts as she walks. And she sits down to him, and the message that if you're 14 years old, if you're a 14-year-old boy, what's the message you get? If you drink with a woman or a girl, you're going to have a very, very close friend for the evening, we'll say. I don't want to say anything beyond that. I'm being filmed. So it's about sex. It's about feeling good. And so it's downplayed. Of course it's downplayed. Our job is to make people aware. And the first population we have to make aware is the mentally ill and addicted population. They're at the highest risk, absolutely. And again, the severe mentally ill population, they feel normal at a casino. And why shouldn't they? Why shouldn't they? They're welcomed and accepted there. And you can go and play nickel slot machine for a long time if you are disciplined enough to just play the nickel. Though I had a person come to me one time and say she solved her slot machine problem. She'd been playing the dollar slots by moving to the nickel slots. She had been playing 2 credits at a time on a dollar slot, $2 a pull. She said, now I play the nickel slots. I solved the problem. I said, well, how many credits do you play per pull? She said, 50. 5 cents times 50 is $2.50. She'd been playing 2 credits on the dollar machine before. That's the distortion in thinking. Yes?
So far as in the addiction field, I'm not finding too many clients that are identified as having gambling addiction.
Okay.
But are you finding that people that have gambling problems, that they're having an addiction?
Substance problems? Yes, absolutely. The research varies depending on whose research you look at. But I think a good rule of thumb is in a substance treatment facility, about 10% of the people there have a gambling problem. And in a gambling treatment program, about 30% of the people have a substance problem. So you're going to find it. You have to screen for it. If you screen for it, you will find them. Yes, sir. Yes.
We go to the programs throughout the state, and it's just been in the past year or two that they've required a gambling assessment to accompany you when you enter treatment. Well, we found, I don't know, 1, 2 people maybe that have an actual gambling problem according to this assessment for SOGs or whatever. And so it isn't working to identify the gambling.
The gentleman raises a good point. And this is something actually that we've talked about extensively at the Maryland Center for Gambling Excellence. And that is the initial screening in substance addiction facilities found very low rates of actual gambling problem. From experience, it depends how you ask the questions. Do you think you have a problem with gambling? No. Here's how it sounds. This is how the interview sounds. And I'll pick on this poor person. So, just about everybody gambles. Actually, statistics show about 90% of people gamble at one time or another in their life. So, what kind of gambling? Not do you gamble. What kind of gambling have you liked to do over the years? And she says to me, well, you know, I played some card games when I was a kid, but I haven't placed a bet in years. So then I say, well, just to be sure, so you know what gambling is. Gambling is when you put up something of value, money, but it could be something else. And in order to try to get something of greater value, and you don't really have control over the outcome. And if the person says no, then we don't have a problem. But when I say to somebody, everybody likes to gamble, or most people like to gamble, what kind of gambling do you like to do? And they say, oh, I like the slots. Oh, okay, you like the slot machines. How often do you go? You know, well, I don't know, I go a couple times a month. Now, when somebody says to you, I have 3 beers a day, what's the exponential multiplication you do? Okay, it's at least double. Okay, so I go a couple times a month. Okay, so when you go to play the slot machines, has there ever been a time, and this happens to a lot of people, where you've gone and you've played a little bit more money or more money than you wanted to? And if you get a yes to that one, get out the South Oaks gambling screen and do the screening. It's how you ask the question. And you know, as the next couple of years unfold, because your legalization is fairly recent, you're going to see an influx. It's going to happen. It's how you ask the question. And the first question is, you know, not do you gamble, what kind of gambling do you like to do? And 90% of people will name something. Something. Yes?
So we do the initial screening for gambling, but we really need to do another screening partway through treatment and maybe towards the end, because if
Yeah.
you ask the crack addict, do you gamble? No, I'm too busy buying crack.
Exactly. But you know the addiction balloon gets squeezed, and what happens? You know, somebody lessens the amount of crack cocaine they're smoking, but if they're not doing, if they're just getting abstinent, if they're not doing recovery activities, we know they're at risk. They're at risk. And so gambling activity may pick up, okay? A lot depends on milieu, you know, where this person is. And it may be very normal in the neighborhood. And it may be seen as a healthy diversion, a healthy alternative. You know, I don't smoke crack, so on check day, I buy 50 lottery scratch-offs. And that's my rush. But, of course, that compounds.
And then the other problem is that you're adding more dimensions to already overworked counselors. So if the
Right.
patient says, no, I don't have a gambling problem, well, that's just great for them because they don't have to pursue it.
Yeah. One thing to keep in mind, too, is that the general population is drinking the Kool-Aid on gambling as an addiction gradually. But there's still a lot of people who say that gambling's not an addiction because there's no substance. Well, there is. We know about the reward pathway. Okay. But there's a lot of men who will say a man, a real man, can handle his gambling. It's a macho thing. Okay? We all know, first of all, that the most important factor in predicting good outcome for all therapy, no matter what it is you're doing counseling or therapy for, substance, mental illness, whatever it is therapeutic alliance. There is no improvement until there's a therapeutic alliance. How many times have you had a client with whom you have developed a therapeutic alliance, maybe it took 2 visits, maybe it took 10, and then they say there's something I haven't been talking about. Or then the guard is down, the defenses come down, and you can say to them at that point, you know, everybody gambles. The first time we met, you said you never had a problem with gambling, but you did mention that you really enjoyed playing poker. So let's just be sure about this. You know, let me ask you a few questions. Once you have a therapeutic alliance, it's not that people are dishonest before they have the alliance, but they're guarded, as they should be. I don't know you. Am I going to trust you? But once I have that alliance, now my guard comes down. So, yes, you screen for, just as if you have somebody who presents with an alcohol problem, how many times does somebody with an addiction problem have a sex problem? Almost always. Okay? That old devil's sex is almost always involved. Do people tell you about their sexual issues, sexual orientation, aberrant practices, sexual history in the first few meetings? Of course not. It's too shameful. It's too shameful. So we always have to be screening and rescreening. When do we stop assessing? As we say goodbye at the last session, that's when we stop assessing. And if 5 seconds before the end of the last session, the person says, oh, by the way, I didn't mention to you, but we don't close the case. You know, so, okay, we got to work on that now. Yeah, the gift that keeps on giving. So, you know, how do you ask the question? Do you have alliance? What's this person's cultural attitude towards gambling? Should, you know, a man should handle his gambling, so he's not going to admit it. A lot of stuff to come in. Charlie.
Is this, you may have already answered it, I missed it, but is this a face valid screening, or do you have?
Is that the South Oaks?
Yeah.
Is it face? What do you mean face valve?
Do you give it to the
Oh.
client?
Can the South Oaks gambling screen be self-administered? The answer is yes, but I prefer in an intake to administer it myself because you get so much information. So you say to someone, have you ever chased your losses, that has gone back another day to win the money you lost? Yes. Tell me about that. It's just so, you know, gives you such an opening. But it can be self-administered. It's pretty easy. It's yes, no. Pretty easy. Yes?
Could you elaborate? I don't quite think I understood that. You said something about sexual addiction or sexual problems with addictions.
Oh my, yes. Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I mean, that's a 3-credit course.
When you say problems, do you mean sexual addiction, what they call it, sex addict, or sexual problems in terms of performance?
All of the above. The relationship between issues of sexuality and addiction, you know, anybody who treats addiction knows that there's almost always some kind of a sexual issue, whether it was sexually abused in childhood, you know, or that early sexualization that goes on, issues around sexual orientation, transgendered issues occasionally, sexual performance issues, aberrant sexual practices, you know, shameful sexual activity in the past. You know, for instance, you know, African American men who are out in the down low, that is out engaging in homosexual activity, gay activity, who identifies heterosexual, but this is something I do on the side. It's tremendously shameful activity, you know, for those men. Okay, so there's a strong association. You know, which comes first, the sexual practices over which I'm ashamed, or the treatment, quote unquote, with the substance to quell the shame? Well, you know, it all goes together. It all goes together. When do most addictions get started? When kids are 13, 14, 15 years old. You know, when are boys and girls first being sexually aroused? And, you know, okay. Huge association. Absolutely huge. Absolutely huge. And, of course, when intoxicated, our inhibitions come down. No matter what the substance, inhibitions come down, and now sexual practices get out of control. Absolutely out of control. So it's a huge problem. Yes?
You mentioned that our job is to help people be aware, especially the population of mentally ill and substance abusing clients. How do we as clinicians prevent that it become another attraction for them in the awareness process?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Well, we were sitting in one of the groups that we had, and they were talking about somebody who overdosed and died. And And the reaction of our substance abuse clients is, I want to know what you took because that must be really good. But
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
take that without dying.
Right.
And that was their thought process. So if we're talking about gambling
Mhm.
and the dangers of it, wouldn't it be another attraction for them?
Okay, I see a question now. Question is an interesting one. We know that people with addiction problems, when they're still active in the addiction, that there is a high capacity to tolerate risk. Okay, people with addiction problems are very good at risk tolerance and tend to be very poor at self-discipline, self-control. So when they hear about a new version of heroin out there that people are dying from, it becomes attractive because the high risk causes a sense of excitement. It's very pleasurable. So do we risk, by telling people gambling is a dangerous addiction, for the addicted person to say, oh, I want to try that? Well, I guess in a way you do. But I think that authenticity is an absolute cornerstone of any therapeutic alliance, any relationship. So that when I'm working with somebody who has an addiction problem, who I believe is either at risk for a gambling problem or actually has a gambling problem, I would be deficient in my duty if I did not raise the issue and make sure that the person understood that gambling is an addiction and that it is a high-risk addiction. Now, what happens if you see a twinkle in the eye of that person? Oh, it's a dangerous thing. That's your therapy, isn't it? Isn't that the work you do? Isn't authenticity about naming what's happening in the here and now without judging it? So when I say to you gambling's a dangerous addiction, the facial expression you make tells me that in a way that makes it appealing. What's that like for you? What does that mean to you? Because I can tell you this. If we think by not mentioning it, they're not going to find that out, of course. Of course. You know, my interns, I teach in a master's in clinical mental health counseling program at Wilmington University. And one of the things we have to make sure the interns understand before they get out there is you have to ask people, every single intake you do, whether they feel suicidal at all, whether they've considered suicide. And when you ask the question, have you ever felt suicidal? Are you suicidal now? Nobody ever says, you know, I never have. But now that you mention it, that seems like a good idea. It's just not how it works. So I don't know that there's much risk, and I know if you don't ask the question, and if you don't raise the point, that actually you do put people at risk.
So would it make a difference if you address that in groups or individually?
That's a good. I've never thought about that. Does it make a difference addressing it, group or? I would think not. I would think not. I think, you know, the problem with groups and addiction is if you have people whose motivation, if we think of the stages of change model, okay, if you have too many pre-contemplative in the group, why you have people in contemplative stage, okay, that's a bad mix. Because the ambivalent people, exposed to the people who say, give me a break, this isn't a problem, that's bad mix, okay. So presumably you're screening your groups and you're not putting the pre-contemplatives in with the people who are ambivalent in contemplation stage, okay. So I'm just kind of brainstorming along, but based on your question, to me, I think the key is if you have a group and it's a group of people who are still ambivalent about addiction, then you don't simply give them this news, you process this news. And you make it a part of the mindset that you carry with you as an addicted person. Okay, let's do one more question before we move along. I saw some hands up. Yes, sir.
Well, this is not necessarily a question, but just an assumption. I was surprised to see how much data is on teen, adolescent gambling. And I know that me personally and the population that I work with and how much we tend to bet everything when we're younger. When I'm 13 or 14, I bet you can't touch the rim with a basketball.
Oh, yeah.
I bet you can't run faster than me.
Right.
Bet pinky swear, pinky swear, pinky swear. And how
I haven't heard Pinky swear in a while. That's true, though, yeah.
Being 9 to 10 years
Yeah.
old, and how it really grows
Yeah.
into something really,
Yeah, it's part of the language. Yeah, it's part of the language. Yeah, same thing. And you know, I remember, I still remember when I was able to get the rim. And I felt like such a man, but I could never get above the rim. I get it about this. You know, I always looked for a rim that was 9 feet 10 inches high. That was the rim I wanted. You know, just low enough I could get over there. Yeah, you know, it's part of the language. And one of the things I learned as a therapist a long time ago is that there's great truth to the statement, as I hear myself speak, so I come to believe. As I hear myself speak, so I come to believe. This is why memorization is such an important activity for school-age people. You know, back when I was in school, they used to make us memorize poetry. I don't know that that's done anymore, but I think that's a good thing. I think it's a very good thing. So language matters. And yeah, I grew up, I think especially amongst jocks, and you know, I grew up and time was measured in terms of go in order, football, basketball, baseball, and throughout it all, except the dead of winter, stickball. That was the main game. And all of these games included betting, not for money, but this I bet, I bet, I bet. And of course, the payoff was, you know, somebody said to me, I bet you can't get the rim, and I get the rim. There is a payoff. It's an ego payoff. And keep in mind that for a lot of gamblers, this is ego-driven. This is ego-driven. There's a great movie, I'll get to you in a second. There's a great movie called The Cincinnati Kid. I don't know if you've ever seen it. Steve McQueen. He does a great job showing the compulsive gambler. Now, he's a very measured compulsive gambler. The movie ends with him losing to Edward G. Robinson, who is not a compulsive gambler. He's smart. See, there are poker players out there who are professionals. Not the guys you see on ESPN in these tournaments. They're idiots. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're probably nice guys. I don't know. But at the end of the movie, Edward G. Robinson breaks Steve McQueen. Okay, and he walks out, and he's busted. I mean, he's busted emotionally, he's busted financially, relationship, he's busted. He goes outside, he's out in a back alley, and there's a little kid back there with dice. And he starts taunting him. Hey, kid, you can't beat me, kid, you can't beat me. And what does he start doing? He starts shooting dice. Ego. It's about ego. And that's exactly what you're addressing. When we're kids, we do this I bet, I bet, I bet. That's ego investment. Now, you take that same kid, put him in an abusive family of origin, where there's gambling, and when he wins, his old man says to him, hey, kid, way to go, and he finally gets the praise he craves. You can see, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense. Okay, last question, then we'll go on to present. Sure.
And I have friends who are professional pool players. And they've said to me, well, you're really not going to be able to step up your game unless you start betting, unless you start paying for money.
Got a little skin in the game.
I had enough sense to realize I would be a hustler.
That's right. That's right, yeah. It's another great movie, The Hustler. Great movie.
It's that whole mindset that,
Yeah.
you know, it changes the whole paradigm
Oh, yeah.
when you put money into the game.
Yeah. When we are in a state of high anticipation or moderately aroused by fear, our minds work more quickly, our skills get better. The right amount of fear, and you're much more effective. When you take like the National Counselor exam, you want to go in moderately nervous because your mind works faster then. Fear speeds up thinking processes. If it's too much fear, you lose control of your thinking. If it's just the right amount of fear, you think faster. You're more skilled. Any athlete knows this. Any athlete knows that when you're behind, you get that rush. And you're faster, you're stronger, you're quicker. Some people, you call choking when the fear overwhelms you. And it diminishes your performance. Was it the Yerkes-Dodson curve? You all familiar with the Yerkes-Dodson curve? It's that curve that shows, you know, the right amount of fear, and you're going to be much more effective. So when my students say to me, I'm nervous about taking the National Counselor exam, I say, good, you should be. Just don't get too nervous. Find the right level of anxiety. They don't like me. What do they know? Okay. So, risk and protective factors. Risk factors, influence of society, and personal risk factors. We're going to take a look at this. It's the interaction between the two. Okay, so obviously societally, there's much higher risk because there's so much more gambling. And if you grew up in a family or a culture where gambling is very, very normal, much higher risk, okay? But then there are intra-personal factors as well that we have to look at. So societal influences. Video games, my goodness. You know, I mean, this is normalized now. So what's going to make the video game more exciting? Get a little money on it, you know? The kids already, you know, 8, 9-year-old kids, I guarantee you they're saying, I bet with the video game. Okay? So you put some money on it. You know, fundraisers in schools and church, the social acceptability of this. This is just normal. You know, my mother, 84 years old, she stopped gambling 6 or 7 years ago. She has dementia, and she, you know, we don't let her go anymore. But once she turned 60, she was on the bus every day. Not every day, a couple times a week. And, you know, it was socially acceptable. It's a normal thing to do. Of course, the venues, the access, the increased venues, the internet access, the advertising, you know, oh my goodness. Your reward system gets turned on when you watch an ad if you can associate with gambling winning. Now, I don't gamble. I never have. I got into this field. It was the weirdest thing when they asked me to sign a contract at a community mental health center to provide gambling treatment services in 1997. I said, I don't gamble. And they said, well, we don't have anyone else. Do you want it or not? You know, I had just finished my master's degree in pastoral counseling. Anything for a buck. What the heck? I'll give a shot at it. I go back to Loyola College, at that time now it's Loyola University, and my mentor as I was beginning the doctoral program was a guy named Dr. Joe Shiraki. Anybody know Joe? The best. I say to Joe, do you know anything about gambling? And he pulls down textbooks he had written, journal articles he had written on treatment of gambling problems, and he said, I'm about to fly to Tokyo to address the international conference. I'm the plenary speaker. Any questions? Better to be lucky than good. Okay. So why did I go off on that tangent? I don't know. There was a reason for it, though. But the advertising is powerful. Oh, I know, I don't gamble, yet I got into this field. But if you do gamble, and you've won, and if you gamble, then you have won, okay? And then you watch the ad showing people winning, it brings back your own affective experience of having won. Remember, memory is not just some picture you see in your head. When I bring to mind the image of my 2 children being born, and I was, of course, in labor and delivery, if I close my eyes and really bring myself back to that, all of the emotions, all the affective parts of it come back to me. So if I'm a gambler and I see an ad on TV that shows people winning, the memory, the affective memory is strong. Remember, memory is not something that happens in your head. Your whole body remembers. Your whole body remembers things. The neurons don't stop here. And remember, memory is just neurons firing in a certain sequence. And you got neurons throughout your body. Memory, a lot of times, is in your gut, isn't it? Okay? So parental modeling is huge. Normalizing it, so forth. Of course, protective factors, knowledge. And I think parents, especially with adolescents, but knowledge. You know, sense of self, strong self-esteem. Self-esteem is an interesting construct. It doesn't predict a lot necessarily, okay? And I think we have to take the word strong when we put it in front of the phrase self-esteem and not interpret strong as high, okay? Gander Hill Prison in Wilmington, and I'm in there a lot, has a lot of men with high self-esteem. And people say, oh, it's false high self-esteem. Well, I don't know, these guys look pretty cocky to me. I think having a strong sense of self, I think having a strong sense of self-efficacy, seeing yourself as someone who can do things in your environment, gives your self-esteem a very accurate feel to it. I think it's very important to be able to cite what you do well and what you do poorly and accept all of it. Okay? So be careful of this idea that it's about high self-esteem. I think it's about accurate self-estimation. Emotional security, of course, and again, you know, gambling incites affective pathways in the brain and body. Okay, anticipation, excitement, and so forth. So if you're emotionally secure, to me what emotional secure means is I know how to manage those affective pathways. Now, most people don't talk that way, but we're a bunch of nerds. You know, we're bachelor's or master's or PhD level clinicians, so we talk that way. Emotional security. I am a body that has affective responses over and over again all day. Can I manage those? Can I manage those? And managing means that I can choose the behavioral response to the affect that goes through my body that is the most skillful one to follow. Remember, behaviors follow affect. Every used car salesman in the world knows this. When you walk through the door, the used car salesman doesn't start by trying to go through a cognitive pathway to explain why this, 2001 Subaru is the right car for you. The used car salesman wants you to feel good when you come into his or her domain. Because any good salesman knows behavior follows affect. Cognitions follows behavior. A, B, C. Affect leads to behavior, leads to cognitions. Cognitions backfill logic explaining the behavior. If the behavior is seen as not skillful because the cognitions say, oh, wait a second, that's not what we want to do, then we say the person has good affect management skills, is emotionally secure. I hope that makes some sense. Peer group, biggest predictor of problems in adolescence. Who do you hang out with? I mentioned this earlier. Your peer group. Okay? This is why clubs and groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, 4-H club, sports teams, playing ball saved my life. I had a good family of origin, but the coaches I had were the best. Okay? Being a part of an organization, who do you hang out with? Who do you associate with? It's just so important. Intra-family connectedness. We've lost dinner time. We're losing that battle. Sitting down to dinner as a family and having parents who can manage a conversation at the dinner table that is safe, emotionally validating, enjoyable. This is just so important. Strong, open communication with loved ones, being connected to the community. Back when I was a kid, the identification with community was through church. When people said to me, where are you from? I said, St. Mary's Parish, Dumont. That was my identity. Catholic school kid, this is my church. How many of you grew up as church kids? Okay, and when you were asked your identity, you might have said, oh, yeah, I'm in this church. Having that sense of connectedness through the community, through these kind of organizations, is important because it identifies you to yourself. I was victimized by 8 years of nuns, followed by 4 years of Xaverian brothers, and then my higher education is 10 years of Jesuit priests. Do you think it's part of my identity? People say, are you Catholic? I say, how could I not be? I could publicly proclaim the Pope is the devil and I leave the Catholic. I'd still be Catholic because it's part of who you are. So these are important. How do you identify yourself? How does your child identify himself or herself? As a Boy Scout, as a Girl Scout, as a jock, as a volleyball player. It all matters. It all matters. Yes, sir?
Is it not important that connectedness is some influences that might lead away from gambling?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The question is it important that those influences are non-addiction, non-gambling, but non-addiction? Of course, yes, absolutely. There's not many scoutmasters saying, hey, let's try some Coke. One hopes. I don't know, maybe not. But, my Little League coach never said, hey, let's do a line. It didn't work that way. So, yes, these influences. And, as I hear myself speak, as I see myself behave, so I come to believe, so I come to identify. Identity is largely driven through behavior. I see myself as a father. Why? Because I biologically fathered 2 children? That's not what it takes. I see myself as a father through all the soccer games I sat through, all the volleyball games, and oh God, the worst, the swim meets. They go on forever. And then your kid gets in the pool, comes in 18th place, and you go buy them an ice cream cone. Okay, it's behavior. Behavior leads to identity. You do Bible study. That identifies you. It's the kid who does Bible study. These things are so important. You know, if you look at all this, what we're talking about is good parenting. When someone comes in to see us and we notice the transference phenomenon, that is, they feel in our presence as if in the presence of someone else, what's the most frequent nature of that transference? Is it not parental? I have reparented people much older than me. Okay? And then occasionally some 25, 30-year-old person comes in and it's the right age. Though it used to be some 18 or 20-year-old comes in and it's the right age. Now it's 30-year-olds, it's the right age. But you know, time marches on. Good parenting is the ultimate protective factor. So again, reinforcing that, you know, things like family cohesion, school connectedness, good coping and adaptive behaviors. Mentorship is huge. Mentorship is so huge. We think it's so important in the Delaware Professional Counselors Association that we put a ton of energy into mentoring new graduates with counseling degrees. We match them up with professionals in the field to mentor them along. It's just so important to be a mentor. Parents disapproving of gambling, belief in the moral order. I love that. You know, I think we've lost that. Then I see what came out a few days ago, the Senate report, and I really wonder if we've lost our moral order. Religious affiliation. Church your kids, whether you believe or not. You know what's interesting? Even if you're a non-believer, if you church your kids, if you go to church, and church or synagogue or whatever your kids, even if you're doing it for extrinsic reasons, social connection and so forth, it's a protective factor. Just being there. It's a protective factor. You know, I'm not going to try to explain that. But again, tell me who your friends are. I'll tell you who you are. Oh, one more. Resilience. Resilience is a great feature. You know, resilience is interesting. You all probably had the experience of the client whose emotional distress in their life is the equivalent of the emotionally stubbed toe, and they completely fall apart. And then people who grew up in these houses of horror, parents who beat them, all these awful things, and they're doing great. And they come in with some kind of a problem. Resilience is really an interesting facet, and a lot of resilience is understood as being a feature of temperament. And temperament is about 50% inheritance. Okay? It's a very interesting construct. There are things we can do to help people be more resilient, and a lot of those things have to do with social connectedness. Because when I need resilience, when I need help coping, to not decompensate, it's my friends and loved ones I reach out to, and they're the bridge over troubled water. Okay? But resilience is a very, very important feature, especially with our young ones. And when we are doing addiction work, once people get to that action stage of change, where they're motivated, they establish early sobriety and abstinence. Now we're really focusing on relapse prevention work. What we're teaching is resilience. The problem isn't the craving. The problem is what do you do after you have the craving. Craving's an affect. Affects lead to behaviors. The problem isn't the affect. The problem is the behavior. So we learn new behaviors. That's resilience training. And that's an important part of addiction recovery, including gambling. Why do kids gamble? Well, why not? You know, the money, I mean, just the idea of earning. How many teenagers are satisfied with how much cash they have? You don't want them satisfied. You don't want your kids to peak too soon. We live next to St. Mark's High School in Wilmington, Delaware. And when I run sometimes, I run through the parking lot. And I see BMWs. These parents crazy. You want your kid to be in a 1991 Dodge Spirit. You want your kids saying, but Dad, you could afford a better car. And I say, you can't. Ha! Man, kids peaking. 16-year-old with a BMW. My son came home one day, disgusted looking. He said, there's a kid in my class, 16 years old. Parents bought him a brand new Humvee for his birthday. I was like, oh my God, what a mistake. What a mistake. Kids want more money. Every kid, well, most, not every. but most kids want more cash, and gambling's the way to get it. And advertising helps. Alcohol advertising, you'll get girls. Gambling advertising, you'll get money. Go to the casino, drink and gamble, you get everything. It's fun, excitement. I'm sorry, gambling's fun. It's like with substances. People say to me, why does anyone take heroin? I always say, have you tried it? And people, they go like this, no, I've never tried it. And I say, well, I have. And then you always get the shot, Dr. Walsh, you've tried heroin? Actually, fentanyl. Anybody ever get a shot of fentanyl for surgery or something like that? I'm telling you, it's the good stuff. And I've had heroin-addicted people tell me, oh, fentanyl. Yeah, I was having a shoulder surgery, and they were about to start cutting. I looked at the anesthesiologist and said, you forgetting something? And I hit the plunger, and I felt like Homer Simpson with a donut. I was like, oh. And in recovery, I said to the nurse, what did they give me in there? And she said, fentanyl. She said, would you like some more? Would I? Should I? I said, nah, give me an anti-inflammatory. It's fun. Gambling's fun. It's enjoyable. If you're not sure about that, try it. Now, I don't find sitting at a slot machine fun, but I find going on the golf course and betting quarters for getting birdies and sand saves and stuff like that. A buck on whoever wins the front nine, a buck on the back nine, and $2 for the overall. I mean, it's fun. It just makes it so much fun. So it's enjoyable, it's exciting, and it's social. And again, don't underestimate the quality of social experience people have when they go to a casino. You're lonely and bored. You go to the casino. People in the casino, you can always find someone to talk to. And the other thing is it's a spiritual experience. There's no atheists on a casino floor. Everybody's praying. And it's funny when you think of it that way, but I'll tell you this. When you pray at the casino and you win, you do feel connected to God. Don't underestimate that. I had a woman years ago who had been brutally raped throughout her childhood. Her mother sold her into prostitution. At age 12, she was taken out of the house and put in an orphanage run by Catholic nuns. The nuns wore the old-fashioned habits. They were not sister, they were called mother. You see how beautiful this is for this 12-year-old. Now she's surrounded by women who are dedicated to being compassionate, loving human beings, and they're all called mother. So she's 18, she leaves. Unfortunately, she married the alcoholic, abusive man, and then another, and then, went on and on and on. Till finally she discovered slot machines at around age 50 when Delaware legalized. And here's how she would gamble. Have the money in the machine, she would hit the button, she would lay hands, which is a very, very important religious symbol or sign. Okay? She would lay hands on the machine and pray the Hail Mary, pray to the Virgin. When she won, for her, the feeling that came up was the sense of connectedness she had to the Virgin. And the Virgin is very important to her because of her experience from age 12 to 18 in the orphanage. So this was very, very spiritually connecting for her. And when she did not win, it was evidence that she had not prayed well. And so her trips to the casino had a deeply spiritual meaning to her. And if you think about it more universally, when your system is working and you're on a winning streak, it's like the tumblers in the lock of the universe have all fallen into place. Life makes sense and you feel control over it. And yes, it is a transcendent experience. Absolutely. So it's very social, not only because you can go and really talk to people. Go to a sports bar, the guys who have a lot of money on the football games, it's a lot of talking about the games and a lot of trash talking and all that sort of thing. But it's a great place to go and make those kind of connections. Normalized. Gaming. Gaming. Okay, this slide did not translate properly. Where do youth gamble? Each set of three bars represents family, friends, external venues. So the light blue is with family, the dark blue is with friends, the purple is external venues. Each set of three bars is a different age. So the far left of this graph, I believe, is like ages 10 to 12 or something like that. And as we go across, this final set of three bars, I believe, is people in their 20s. you can see that gambling begins in the family, and by the time people get into their adulthood, external venues are really growing along with friends. Okay? So where do our youth gamble? Increasingly outside the home. Now, I've heard parents, so-called, say, yes, I let the teenagers drink because as long as they do it in my home, it's safe. It's not safe at all. The same is true with gambling. We gamble in the home, we keep it in the home, it's safe. No, the child learns to gamble. And as the child gets older, instead of playing the penny ante games in the home, the child goes out looking for bigger stakes. Now, I'm not against all gambling. When we were kids, I forget what the card game was, but my father and mother had a big bag of pennies. That was your chips. And you would play with those, and then when you were done, all the pennies would go back in the bag. Nobody won anything. I'm still bitter. But you have to be cautious about this. Who do adolescents gamble with? Okay, again, the light blue bar is younger age. The dark blue bar is mid-adolescence. The purple bar is late adolescence, around 20 years old. So you can see increasingly alone, increasingly with friends, okay, with total family drops over time with relatives. So the gambling behavior gradually shifts from family and relatives, where it's probably safe, to external sources. So two graphs making the same point. What kinds of gambling do kids do? And again, we have the age breakdown with each set of 3 bars. You can see that if you look at the dark blue bar, which is when children are youngest, it's lottery, it's card playing, and so forth. As kids get older, you're looking at the green bar, and you see cards, sports lottery. Lottery is really, really mushrooming. Lottery is a huge problem. And it's funny, we don't think of lottery as a problem because it's a buck scratch-off. The Pennsylvania Lottery. They get the little song. They have the groundhog. The groundhog advertises in Pennsylvania. It's Punxsutawney Phil himself, a puppet version of him. And he's telling you that gambling's cool. It's what you want to do. Cartoon characters telling us that gambling's cool. That might appeal to kids. Normalizes it all. It normalizes it. So increasingly we see the trend going towards all kinds of different games. Video poker picks up. Slot machines, of course, not going to pick up a lot. It's interesting. There is slot machine playing with young kids who are underage. Where are they playing slots? Where can you get a slot machine outside the casino? Anybody know? Corner stores, bars. Yeah. A lot of local bars will have a couple slots in the back, and people know about them. Nothing's done about it. So how do you prevent this? There's no one strategy that works. The main thing you need to do is strengthen families. That's what this is about. Can we strengthen families? What do we do to strengthen families, to help people to present this? Okay, so the implications here. It's one of many activities that carry risk. Let's make sure we're educating parents and kids about this. Let's make sure we're aware of the risks and of the problems. It should be something we talk about. Let's make sure teachers know about this. Teachers with gambling problems. There's an issue. Okay, there's a real issue. Guidance counselors in schools. They need to know this. Counseling centers in schools need to be screening for this. This slide shows the Smart Choices program that the Maryland Council has. Obviously, I'm not going to read this, but you can get these cards that they give out. When does gambling become a problem? Some of the things to look for. Missing school or work in order to gamble. Thinking about gambling all the time. More and more time gambling. Gambling to escape or forget problems. When we look at the DSM later on, you're going to find that one of the criteria for gambling disorder diagnosis is gambles as a way to escape a dysphoric mood. Why isn't a criteria like that in the substance criteria? Uses substances as a way to escape dysphoric mood. Doesn't that make sense? It's not in the substance criteria. It's been in the gambling criteria all along. Lying to people, yes?
Are these available in the disc that we were
Yes. all of these slides, except for the silly ones I've added, the teapot and that sort of thing, all of these slides are on your desk. If you want the teapot picture, send me an email. So, how do you know your kid's gambling? Well, it's hard to say. Are they stealing money out of your purse? Okay? A trick that a lot of family members will do who have gambling problems is tear a check out from the bottom of the checkbook. Okay? That's a big one. Tear a check out from the bottom of the checkbook. So I have a checkbook. It has 50 checks in it. Okay? I'm on the 14th check. Take the check from the bottom. I'm not going to get to that one for a while. And pass that check. Counter checks. You go into a bank, they have blank check forms. If I know my routing number and if I know my account number, I can write a check at the counter. It's another way. When you work with an adult with a gambling problem and that person has a spouse and the spouse says, I closed our checking account so he or she can't get to it and I opened a new account in my name, that's good. Where's the checkbook? Well, it's in the drawer on my desk. His name's not on it. You see the problem. You can write a counter check. And you have to remember something. Okay, tangent, here we go. The human brain is wired to remember success. Back when we were, crawling around the plains in Africa or wherever, 100,000 years ago, it was very important to remember where the food was. Not important to remember where the food wasn't. I'm not going back to the places where the food wasn't. I'm going back to the places where the food was. We're wired to remember successes. So somebody spends 12 hours in the casino, and you say, what happened while you were there? Well, I hit 3 jackpots. Okay, so you're there for 12 hours. How many times do you think you played the slot machine? Well, I don't know. Well, how many times can you play in a minute? 5 times. Okay, so that's 300 plays in an hour. Well, I take breaks. 200 plays in an hour. Sure, you were there 12 hours, right? Right. So you played about 2,500 times. That makes sense. Okay, what do you remember? I hit 3 jackpots. What about the other 497 plays? I remembered. It's what people remember. They remember their wins. This is important because you see, to the gambler, it's not stealing from you. It's just getting the money I need so I can pay you back what I took from you, build up my stash for future gambling. It's not theft because I know I'm going to win because I've won before. I know I'm going to win. And when I say to you, to the gambler, it's not lying, I mean that literally. The gambler, when he or she is in the middle of the active phase of the addiction, does not have the moral pangs of conscience telling that lie. And you work with addiction. You know how ubiquitous lying is in addiction. You can't be honest and be active in an addiction. What are you going to do this afternoon? I'm going to shoot a little heroin. How about you? I mean, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So the lying is ubiquitous. You have to lie to do it. But to the gambler, it's doubled down on the lie because it's not a lie when I steal money from you because I know I'm due to win. And I will pay you back. There's a thing called bailouts. Gamblers take money under false pretenses. Got a leak in the roof, I need $1,000. Okay. Maybe there is a leak in the roof, but I know I'm going to turn the 1,000 into 5,000. I'm going to get the roof fixed, pay you back the 1,000. I'll still have a couple grand for myself to go gamble some more. And it makes so much sense, except it's wrong. It's not correct, of course. So what are you looking for? Well, secretiveness, a lot of time out of the house, a lot of time alone, or a lot of time hanging out with kids that you just don't like. Okay? Anxious, nervous. Most people don't lie well. Most people don't make eye contact when they lie. Or they make too much. I'm not lying. I'm looking right at you. Of course I'm not lying. You know I'm not lying. I'm telling you the truth. I love that. How's your week gone, Joe? Oh, it's going great, Jim. I haven't gambled at all. Nothing at all. How about you? Yeah. Let's talk about you, Jim. Here's the one they all know because, when we had the grandson, I had to take a few weeks off to go to France. Yeah, and they say, how about that grandson of yours, Jim? I bet he's getting cute. Oh, yeah, he's fine. Now, this week, I'd love to see a picture of him. It's like, okay, here we go. Now I can feed into my own countertransference and but that's not going to be good. So you're looking for an anxious kid, a withdrawn kid, a kid who's hanging out with kids you don't like. Money disappears. There's no explanation for it. Those kinds of things. Irresponsible behavior, staying out of school, grades dropping suddenly. Hard to concentrate when you're $500 in the hole. So the Smart Choices program, I have to admit I've not witnessed or given the Smart Choices program. What I like about this, the focus is on the risks of gambling when you're youthful and positive decision-making skills, learning how to make decisions. Remember, if you don't have a fully formed prefrontal cortex, then you need to learn how that prefrontal cortex will make decisions someday and habitualize that process. The focus is on the entire community. The community has to protect the kids. And unfortunately, as a society, we're not protecting our kids from products like this. Carl's not here today. He comes to a lot of the trainings. Carl's title, I don't remember what it is. But if you want to talk to somebody or email exchange with anybody who really knows this issue inside out, Carl's a great guy to talk to. And there's his email address. And all of this, of course, is on the disk in your folders. There's lots of resources that are given here. Okay. So the next part of the presentation is going to focus on definitions. And before we get there, it's a good time to just say, okay, questions, concerns? Yes?
You made a statement to remind us that the human brain has the capacity to remember success.
Yes.
And it's interesting that that's a truth, and I just wonder why families or even friends or people are more critical of each other and remembering faults rather than the success of people that behave them to do this stuff.
Yeah. The question is, the observation is that as much as our human brain is wired to remember the successes, where the food is, so to speak, as a species, we're very good at pointing out the faults of everyone else. Okay, so I'm just going to go off into Jimmy world and tell you my take on that as a therapist for the last 18 years, is that if I have a very strong and healthy ego structure, I don't need to do that. I don't need for you to be lower for me to be higher. But if my ego structure is weak, if I've grown up, and we'll go to a cognitive model, if my cognitive schema about my sense of self is I'm a loser, I have to earn my love, I'm not unconditionally loved by my parents, I have to do something to prove my worth, my inherent worth, then making you lower is going to make me feel higher. And so, yes, I think, my attitude is very much shaped by my mindfulness practice. And in mindfulness practice, one of the things we learn very early in our practice is that hatred, antagonism, and what you've described as a form of hatred is actually evidence that the other person is suffering. So when you say that thing to me that criticizes me and points out my fault, and it's done to make me know I'm lesser. Different than, as a clinical supervisor of interns, we're educating. That's different. It's the difference between critique and criticism. Okay? That's evidence of suffering. Now, in that moment, if I can be mindfully aware of the arousal of some shame affect or maybe some anger affect in me when you criticize me, and notice that rather than react to it, then the behavior that begins to emerge, which is to get defensive, maybe even blame back, can be thought about and more skillful action taken, which might just be to say, this is important to you, and I'm concerned, are you okay? I'll tell you a story, it's a true story. I was in a grocery store a few years ago, young lady checking me out, and she was rude. I had 5 or 6 grocery items, and she was, at the cash register, and she was rude to me. So, I'm Irish. My Irish gets up, and I'm ready to kind of yell at her a little bit. But, then I took the mindful breath, a little bit of awareness, recognized, this is my stuff. And I said to her, excuse me. And she looked at me, kind of like that. And I said, you were just rude to me for no reason. I said, are you okay? Are you okay? And this is what I saw. She stood down. She had a young kid. The kid was sick. She couldn't find a babysitter. She got to work late. The boss was on her back about being to work late again. She said, I've had a horrible day. It's only 10 a.m. It ended it, didn't it? It ended the cycle. Why are people so quick to be antagonistic to one another? Makes them feel a little better. You know, anger feels good. Think how powerless this young lady felt over her life. Does anger feel powerless? Anger feels good, man. So by being angry at me, she felt some power. I disarmed her. So I said to her, you know, I've raised babies. I know what it's like to be overwhelmed having children. I can't help you with this, but I will pray for you today. You will be in my thoughts. And she said, thank you. Now, it had the intended consequence of disarming my anger, which would have been my suffering on that day. It had the unintended, but probably beneficial consequence of disarming her and allowing her to realize that life can seem really bad, but it's not as bad as it seems. Can we recognize antagonism as suffering? That's a good question. Why do people point this stuff out? Because they're suffering. And if I can make you suffer a little more than me, maybe it doesn't seem so bad. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but that's how I look at it all. Yes?
I like what you're saying. One of the thoughts I had is our brain is wired to remember those positive things, but our brain is also wired to remember when things are really wrong, too.
Right.
Like post-traumatic stress disorder is really about that. So,
Yeah. Stay away from those things.
Now, what I'm realizing, though, as I thought through that, the problem with gambling is people don't identify gambling as the reason why things are going so bad. They're identifying something else.
Yeah. And, you know, the reward pathway reinforcement is stronger than the limbic system shame response. You know, which do you want to put your attention to? Generating the reward pathway response or focusing on the limbic system shame feeling? Well, if I'm in a place where it's safe to have the conversation, i.e. with a therapist, then it's safe enough to go to the shame and go there. And shame is not bad. People say, oh, shame is bad. No, shame's good. Hitler should have had more. Yeah. Shame is corrective. When I do something that hurts another human being and there's some intention in that, I should feel shamed. And that will correct me from doing it again if I can stay present with the shame. And if I'm not staying present with the shame, then a therapist who doesn't judge me ever and validates how I feel will help me stay present with it. Thus the value of therapy. So yeah, shame affect is tough, and people don't want to go there. And the reward pathway is so darn appealing, and it's more salient in memory. All memories are, of course, affectively laden. Why do you remember certain things more than others? There was more affect at the time of the event. It's the stuff you remember. I remember when I was 6 years old winning a stuffed dog this tall at a gambling game at the Parish Carnival. I still remember that. I don't remember much else from when I was 6, except when the nuns slugged me. I had a nun slug me when I was 6. Well, 6-year-olds, you know, they need to get slugged once in a while. It's the only time I ever got hit by a nun, but I was 6 years old. Man, she belted me a good one. And I still remember that. I'm still, hey, let's talk about this. I need some therapy. Yes?
So is denial the same with gambling as with substance abuse?
Oh,
I mean, is it
yeah.
dealt with in the same?
Of course. Yeah, denial. Is denial present in gambling? You think? Yeah, absolutely. Denial. And we're not talking about Freudian denial here. We're talking about not simply wanting to face something that brings up shame affect. Why would I want to do that? So, yeah, it's the same issue. People in pre-contemplative stage, very resistant, don't see it as a problem. You know, what's your job when somebody's there? It's the same for any addiction or any problem that the person's pre-contemplative about. Make the environment very safe. Make the environment very authentic and honest. You know, as therapists, I think our job is to hold up a mirror with no dust on it. But we hold it compassionately. We don't hold it confrontation. See yourself! But rather, this is how I'm experiencing you. And it seems to me that your experience is very painful. I want to help you. But it's an honest holding up of the mirror. It's an honest mirror. So how do we help people through that pre-contemplative stage? I like the word pre-contemplative rather than denial, because I think denial carries a little bit of a pejorative connotation. You're in denial. That's not like saying, hey, you're pretty good looking. You're in denial. Now, you smiled as soon as I said you're pretty good looking, right? And you are, but I'm just picking on you as part of my presentation. And you're laughing about it now. And I say you're in denial. You're not smiling so much. Yeah. See, I'm just making crazy stuff up, but we still feel it, don't we? So saying to someone you're in denial, how's that helpful? Saying to someone you're in pre-contemplation stage. You don't see this as an issue. And so this is how you think. So I shall endeavor to engage you on the issue you're willing to engage so we can build a therapeutic alliance on the issue you're willing to engage on. And once we have a therapeutic alliance, then perhaps your defenses will come down. And there'll be no need to pretend that there's an elephant in the living room. We just don't want to look at it. Okay? Now, if it's life-threatening elephant in the living room, then we got to deal with it, of course. You know, somebody's out there doing very, very risky, high-risk behaviors. That's a different story. Oh, let's move on a little bit. Definitions. Okay. I don't like these fade-in slides, but they're very popular. I didn't make this presentation. People like them. Okay, so gambling, we already defined. Risking something of value, money or property. Activity has an uncertain outcome. It's very general kind of definition, so a lot of things are gambling. And the DSM-5, it's called gambling disorder. The DSM-4 and the DSM-3, it was pathological gambling. Just a little background, by the way. The American Psychiatric Association fought the inclusion of a gambling diagnosis up until 1980. A very important name in our field, Dr. Robert Custer, fought the good fight. He was a psychiatrist at the Brecksville, Ohio VA hospital. And Dr. Custer fought the fight to get pathological gambling into the DSM-3. In the early days, it actually had a rule out that if you had bipolar disorder, you could not make the diagnosis. Because people with manic depressive illness don't gamble out of control. Wait a minute. Okay. Now, you'll see in the DSM-5 for gambling disorder that there is a rule out unless better explained by a manic episode, and that makes sense. If somebody only gambles out of control when they're manic, then the problem is manic depressive illness. And your job is to stabilize the mood, not to say you're an addicted gambler. I've not run into anybody yet that only gambles out of control in the manic phase. I have had people with manic depressive illness whose gambling problem is different depending on the phase. Depressed versus manic, different gambling games. Okay? But if the person only gambles out of control when they're manic, you're not making the diagnosis. Okay, problem gambling, another definition. These are people, it's impaired control. I'm just gambling more than I can afford. And keep in mind, when I say more than I can afford, I'm talking about more than just money, though money's important. I'm talking about time. I'm talking about social and work relationships. So I'm not gambling money I can't afford to gamble, but I'm at the casino 4 nights a week after work, and I have teenage children at home, and I'm not spending time with them. That's a problem. You may not rise to the level of pathological gambling, or gambling disorder as it's called now. But that's a problem, isn't it? So some basic defining terms. The at-risk gambler. There's evidence of some adverse consequence, but no sense of loss of control. Or there's some loss of control, but no adverse consequences yet. Okay? Or there's adverse consequences, loss of control, but we're not meeting criteria. I will say this. If somebody is experiencing loss of control and adverse consequences, it's very rare that they're not going to meet criteria. And if you go through the criteria and the person says, yeah, I can't control my gambling, I always gamble more than I intended, That's what loss of control is. I gamble more than I intended. And there's consequences. I'm not going to work, my schoolwork's suffering, my marriage is suffering, I cashed in my IRAs, I don't have much of a retirement left. If all that's true, along with the loss of control, it's really unlikely that you're not going to get chasing, you're not going to get tolerance buildup. So when you first started, what was enough money to bring to the casino? $100. And what kind of machine? You like slots, right? What kind of machine did you play? You played the quarter machine. How many credits at a time? 1. Now when you go to the casino, how much money do you want to bring with you? Not how much do you bring. How much money do you want to bring? You may not have a lot of money. Well, it really doesn't make sense to go with less than $500. I hate when I go with only 100. It's tolerance buildup. What machine do you prefer to play if you have enough money? Well, the dollar machine. How many credits at a time? 3. That's my preference. It's tolerance buildup. Okay? I need more. It's rare that you're going to get both of these met, and that's bullet point C, without having more criteria met. The recreational gambler, that's most people. Most people go for fun. Now, if you go to the casino on Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m., you're going to see mostly recreational gamblers, people having fun. If you go to the casino on Wednesday morning at 3 a.m., you're not going to see recreational gamblers. Years ago, I was on the state license board for years in Delaware, and the National License Board Member Association, whatever it's called, had their annual meeting in Reno, Nevada, in Harrah's Casino. So I stayed in the hotel room. Of course, I'm on East Coast time, so I wake up at about 2 in the morning. And I said, I might as well go to the gym. So about 3 in the morning, I'm walking through, because you have to always walk through the casino floor to get anywhere. Literally, you want to get anywhere, you have to go through the casino floor. I'm walking through the casino floor at 3 in the morning, and it's jammed with people drinking booze and smoking cigarettes. Oy vey. Yeah. It was interesting because that morning, a representative from the casino came in to welcome us to the casino and assured us that their dealers and all their employees are trained to recognize people with gambling problems. What this person didn't know was she had a National Certified Gambling Counselor, 2, not 1, 2, in the room. So I shot my hand up, and I said, and they recognized them. And what do they do? Well, nothing. That'd be bad for business. No. No, actually, the words were, people have a legal right to gamble. We won't interfere with that. Now, she did say if they notice somebody getting very agitated, very upset, and so forth and so on, that they would triage them out of the area and get somebody to talk to them. And of course, the casinos are full of posters and signs. If you have a gambling problem, call this number and so forth. So much like bartenders calling a cab for the guy who's really drunk, they will look out for the person who's really having a lot of problems.
But they don't have doctors on site.
No, they don't have counselors on site or anything like that. Yes?
Is there truth to the information out circulating that the casinos actually contribute towards treatment?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Most of the legalization across the country requires that, it's not the casino, it requires that a certain amount of the tax revenue collected from the casino be set aside for treatment, and that's true in Maryland as well. So the casino itself does not set that aside. However, I will say that the mainstream casino industry, the big players, are extremely supportive of the National Gambling Council and the local councils. The mainstream players are very supportive of treatment. They recognize that they will kill the goose that lays the golden eggs if they are not socially conscious about this problem. Okay, so on the one hand, the casino industry is pretty shameless in selling this, but on the other hand, they do recognize that this causes people problems, and they are very proactive to support organizations and clinicians to provide treatment. But the revenues to provide the treatment comes through state tax revenues, and it's a set aside. Okay, so let me just, we're just about there. So when we think of types of gamblers, and this is in the area of definitions, we have to recognize that it is, as with most problems that we treat, a continuum. There are people who are depressed a little, people who are depressed moderately, and people who are depressed a lot. Not everybody who comes through our door complaining of depression is ready to take the bridge. Okay, It's a continuum. With addiction, there are people who are drinking a case of beer and a quart of vodka a day, and there are people who are drinking a couple six-packs and it's getting in the way of their life. They're drinking 3 or 4 times a week. It's a continuum. We have to be cautious about black and white labels for addiction. There can be a tendency for people to say, you have the disease, that's it. Not that simple. There is a point where it reaches disease stage, clearly. We know that substances of abuse take over the reward pathway. So the drive that you have naturally from the reward pathway for food, to quench thirst, relieve bathroom needs, sexual arousal, basic core drives are regulated by the reward pathway. We know that substances of abuse become conditioned into the reward pathway. So when people say to me, well, what's it like to crave alcohol or heroin? I say, well, what's it like to be very, very hungry? You know, what's it like when your mother lets you eat breakfast on Thanksgiving, makes you wait till 3 in the afternoon, this is what used to happen to me, wouldn't let you eat anything till 3, sits you down at the Thanksgiving table, surrounded by wonderful food, and then says, okay, let's count our blessings for a while. My goodness, my mother was awful. That's why I am like I am. So what's craving like? Craving is drive system saying you must have this. Okay? And we've all been famished. We've all been so thirsty. We thought we were in, with Lawrence of Arabia. We've all had to go to the bathroom so badly that we couldn't think. Now, let's stay with the bathroom. I'm not saying this to be funny. When I teach first class, students I've never seen, I tell them this. If you have to go to the bathroom, just go. I'm going to take a break at this time. But if you have to go to the bathroom well before that time, just get up and go. Because when your drive system kicks in, when the reward pathway kicks in, when your bowels or bladder are full, the kind of reasoning that you're doing, the part of your brain that's turned on is it's the orbital medial prefrontal cortex that does what's called emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is the logic to satisfy the feeling you have. So at 10 o'clock at night, when all those crazy food commercials play on TV, you ever notice that? Around 9:30, 10, Red Lobster, Domino's Pizza, Papa John's, it all comes on then. And so what's the logic in my brain? I think there's some cheese in the fridge. When your drive system kicks in, the part of your brain that turns on is the part that does emotional reasoning. That's not reasoning that sounds emotional. That's the reasoning that satisfies the emotional need. So if the emotional need is loneliness, the emotional reasoning is, who can I call? Who can I call? When the emotional reasoning part of your brain is very, very active, it's hard to think logically, rationally. That's an activity of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, outside part. So I tell my students, if you really have to go to the bathroom badly, and it's a half hour before the break, you're going to get very little of my lecture in that half hour. So go miss 3 minutes by going to the toilet. You'll miss 3 minutes of my lecture instead of 30. That's a 27-minute advantage. It's worth it. Now, I have to tell you this story. I had a student one time. We had just done all the stages of change education. And we're about a half hour from a break. And she gets up. She walks across the room to the door while I'm lecturing. She gets to the door. She opens the door. She stops. She looks back at me. I notice her look back at me, so I stop my lecture and I look at her, and she says, "My bladder is in action stage." I thought it was a great line. But she was onto something, because when that part of our mind gets activated, we don't think logically. So, somebody in early recovery, when they have craving, which is the better instruction? Try to think logically why you shouldn't use, or give them behaviors to do on a piece of paper. Call your sponsor, Joe. His phone number is. Do I have to think now? No, I just pick up the damn piece. Meeting, when you go to the meeting, you get a list, right? If it's a good meeting, you get a list. You have behaviors laid out to do that you don't have to think about. For me, it would be if I had an addiction problem of that sort, I would throw on my sneakers, throw on my shorts, throw on a shirt, and go run 8 miles. And that would take care of it for me. So, okay, sorry, I went off on a tangent again. But when we identify gamblers, it's a continuum. And the continuum is defined by how well I'm able to keep my rational thinking mind online when I have to make decisions about how much to gamble and how much emotional reasoning goes on. So if I'm strictly a recreational gambler, social gambler, then my dorsolateral prefrontal cortex pretty much stays online the whole time I'm in the casino. If I'm pathological, it's all emotional reasoning and everything in between. So, you know, we have social gamblers and serious social gamblers. Those are the people who go to the casino very regularly for fun, but it's still social gambling. It's not out of control yet. Okay? Then problem and pathological is a continuum, as we've discussed earlier. Professional gamblers. There are true professional gamblers. I think some of your pool buddies. Okay? A professional gambler is someone who bets with no emotion-driven rationale and not ego-driven. It's not ego-driven. It's not driven by emotions. Playing the percentages. There are professional gamblers out there. Most of them report it's not a great lifestyle. Okay? But it can be done, but there can be no emotion drive to it. There can be no ego in it. I'm not betting to prove myself as a human being or as a man. Okay? And the typical professional gambler might bet one race at the track and might bet the favorite to show, come in third, and bet a lot of money. The margin isn't great by percentage, but if I bet enough, the margin is great by volume. So the professional, and in poker, there are professional poker players. There's a lot of people who say they play professionally. Do you win regularly? Well, okay. Because poker is a game of psychology if you're playing on that level. Okay? People, the word is tell, a tell. People have a tell. So here would be my tell. I get a hand and it has 3 kings in it. This is how I would pick it up. That's a tell. That's a rather obvious tell, like that. But tells can be very subtle. So the professional poker player is sitting at a table and really analyzing what's going on at the table, betting patterns, and making decisions about his or her bets based on what's going on at the table. And so it's a great movie, Cool Hand Luke. There's a great scene in it where Luke wins a big pot and he's got nothing. And one of the characters played by George Kennedy says, "You had nothing." And Luke says, "Sometimes nothing is a real cool hand." Well, you know, Luke was playing psychologically against the other prisoners. So that's kind of where professional gamblers are. So 12:15 is our lunch break, and I'm encouraging you to eat healthy, of course. So we have a couple minutes. Time for a question or two. Yes, sir.
The antisocial?
Oh, antisocial gamblers. I'm so sorry. Antisocial gamblers. This is a class, mostly men, of people who are engaged in criminal lifestyle, for the most part, and gambling is part of the lifestyle. Okay? This is not gamblers who steal to support the gambling. This is thieves and otherwise mugs that gambling is just part of the whole way they live. Okay? So the gambling with the antisocial gambler may be something that he swears off of for a while. Okay, but he's, you know, the antisocial gambler is a person who's living a criminal life, and it's just ubiquitous. It's just part of everything he does. Okay, part of his identity. Yeah. You know, when you treat somebody with antisocial personality disorder, you're almost always treating that person for, we'll go back to DSM-4 nomenclature, for some Axis 1 issue that he presents with, or she presents with. You know, there's really no treatment for antisocial personality disorder other than helping them. Well, there are some treatments, but basically it's an aging out process. Keep them alive till they get to a certain age. And they get tired of the chaos. Okay? The antisocial gambler is that kind of guy. And that's a person who probably in his 40s or 50s is going to want to come out of the cold. You know, slow down, calm down, tired of being in prison. I've had this guy come to see me, and I get tired of all the chaos, and the gambling is just part of the chaotic lifestyle that, it's a lot of baloney. I don't want to do it anymore. Age out. Go ahead.
Just another question. Years ago, I had a guy that I saw, and I noticed that one of the personal risk factors, I found a lot of literature about kind of narcissistic personality structure. Do you have any reflection about that?
The statement is reflecting on the role that narcissism plays in gambling.
Yeah.
Well, people who are narcissistic, of course, the definition of narcissistic is lacking empathic understanding of other human beings, inflated sense of self-grandiosity, those sorts of things. A lot of times male gamblers are labeled as being very narcissistic. And I think that there's some truth to the generalization. When the male gambler is in action, actively in the addiction and gambling, and if the games that the male gambler prefers are the so-called skill games, poker, blackjack, craps. I don't know what the skill is in craps, but it's considered a skill game. Baccarat, things like that. So, my preference is to say ego-driven rather than narcissistic. I'm always very cautious about access to diagnoses when somebody's active in an addiction. How many crack addicts have features of borderline personality disorder when they're active in the addiction? Well, come on. We could pretty much diagnose everybody with a crack addiction with borderline disorder if we only look at the period of use. Okay. So we have to look, for an access to diagnosis, we have to look at pre-morbid personality style before the gambling onset and post-morbid after gambling. So, to me it's ego-driven. Are there narcissists who gamble out of control? Of course. Are male gamblers playing the skill games, do they tend to be narcissistic acting? Yeah. What happens when they get in recovery? Usually that stuff starts to come down. Well, that's the question. Yes.
Would you consider Ponzi scheme people as gamblers?
Okay, great question. Ponzi schemes. In case you don't know what a Ponzi scheme is, it's a so-called financial pyramid. Okay, so Bernie Madoff made this most famous most recently. It was Bernie Madoff who was the guy who ran the Ponzi scheme. A gambler? Absolutely. Absolutely, this is gambling. Okay. Are people who invest in Ponzi schemes gamblers? Well, it's an interesting question. It depends on the individual, of course. But, when my broker calls me and says, Jim, and I'm looking at the kind of investments I'm looking for at age 60 are things that are, low risk, pay dividends, all those boring stocks. He calls me and says, I have a preferred stock that pays a 5.25% dividend. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. I'll go for that. What's the stock? Chevron Corporation. Well, okay, Chevron's probably not going to go out of business next week. Okay. Now, my broker's first name is Andy. If Andy called me and said, hey, I got a stock that's going to return 120% every year for the next 10 years. Whoa, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. So are people who invest in Ponzi schemes, who are given these kind of promises, are they gamblers? Well, everybody's investor is a gambler, technically. But are they problem gamblers? That's an interesting question. I would bet, pun intended, I would bet dollars to donuts that you'll find a lot of people with gambling problems in the population of people who invest in Ponzi schemes because the promises are just not believable. If somebody says, I'm going to get you 20% on your money every year, I just don't buy it. I would like it to be true. And are there investments that can give you 20%? Sure. But ain't nobody going to promise me that. So probably yes. Okay, so we're right up against our lunchtime. We have a half hour. Please eat healthy. And we'll be back at 12:45 to start up again.